In times of war, you need to control the narrative. I warned people a month ago that you're going to start to see more and more people go silent on these platforms. You're going to see deplatforming, you're going to see demonetization, you're going to see shadow banning, click bombing on videos, people inundated and flooded with bots and trolls to demoralize them. You are going to see people's characters just get assassinated for a variety of reasons, things conjured up from their past. And I can attest to the veracity of all the claims levied against the usual suspects, be they Tucker Carlson, Andrew Tate, the most recent one, Russell Brand. But what I can say with certainty is if I knew a big war was coming, I would want to get all the dissidents in line. And I would want to make sure that they couldn't extend their influence outside of their echo chamber. And so I would get them all on one platform, echoing ideas off of one another in a very well-contained space that couldn't affect and derail the trajectory of the broader status quo. And that's what's happening right now. Make no mistake, they anticipate the war getting worse. They anticipate financial upheaval. They anticipate political chaos next year. And in doing what they're doing now, by deplatforming people, demonetizing people, it is only going to make the problem worse. It's only going to create more conflict, more distrust, more animosity between the two sides, who are not going to be able to hear the other side's perspective and are just going to assume the worst of one another. We're going to see potential biological threats emerge once again. They don't want to have dissident voices. Whether they be true or untrue is irrelevant. They don't want dissident voices when you're on the brink of the war hitting an inflection point. And we'll talk a bit more about the details of that in particular today. But I'm very, very concerned, and I've been concerned for a long time, which inspired me to make that video a month ago, because it's not just the political pundits and the talking heads and the so-called propagandists. It's everybody that's being impacted by this who expresses dissident opinions. They can be left or right. And that is concerning because, again, as you approach the 0 day, whatever that may be, if it's the collapse of the dollar, if it's engaging in a direct hot war with Russia or China for that matter, as we'll talk about today, the need to control the narrative becomes all the more important. You absolutely must be able to ensure that public opinion doesn't deviate too far beyond what is needed to fuel whatever machinations the military-industrial complex has in mind for us all. So again, I cannot speak to the veracity of the claims levied against Russell Brand. I don't know him for a hole in the ground. I personally don't listen to him that much. I think he's got a bit of a messianic complex thing going on there. But I will say that the stuff that I have heard from him, for the most part, there's several points of agreement with what he says on certain issues. But all I can say is that it does seem to look like a concerted effort to try to stymie and neutralize any sort of dissenting voices. Now, we haven't seen it so much on the left. We've seen it a lot on the right, or the libertarian end of the spectrum, which of course leads one to believe, well, is this politically motivated? Is this really about what is about to happen in November next year? And while that might be the case, I will say that there have been numerous people who are at once, like the hardline progressives, have kind of now been lumped into the camps of the right and the libertarians. So they might appear at first glance to be more right-wing in their ideology, but You know, if you dig deep enough, you realize at one point in time, these people were considered very progressive. So it's really the radicals is what they're going after. Now, we try to keep a balanced point of view on this channel. That means bucking the trends. That means being contrarian when the consensus on any particular issue gets overzealous. That's usually when we pull back and we say, okay, you know, everybody's believing this thing. Typically, historically, the herd is wrong. So we're going to take a step back. We're going to reanalyze this and try to determine whether or not what we're seeing, what we're being told is actually true. More often than not, that's the safest approach to take, because time and time again, when you have any opinion that is incredibly strong, it typically is wrong. Now, it's become abundantly clear to me that we are on the cusp of seeing a massive increase in war spending. We're talking about a $24 billion aid package that is about to be approved for Ukraine. We have China, who is getting very close in their provocations against Taiwan. Just yesterday, there was 103 planes, okay, that crossed the demarcation zone. 103 planes that crossed into Taiwan's airspace, and they keep adding more and more ships, more and more military equipment in around that region, and they're slowly building everything up. In fact, I read an interesting article this morning that talked about how China currently holds, well, they hold a lot more oil reserves than the United States, and the price of oil is skyrocketing once again. China holds 96% of global copper inventories, 75% of global aluminum, 70% of corn, 54% of wheat, 30% of soybeans, and 22% of crude oil. Okay, according to this article, which was forwarded by Zero Hedge, putting this together means that for the first 8 months of the year, China added 800,000 barrels per day of oil to its inventories, and that they currently are sitting on 1.142 billion barrels of oil in July. Now compare that to what the US has when you combine the strategic oil reserve to the other metric. I'm not sure what it's called, but it's just the oil that's out there that's not in the strategic reserve. It's around 700 million barrels. China is stockpiling and preparing for a big war, okay? And this is just but one potential inflection point that they are preparing, because they have to control the narrative, and they have to make sure that when you come under austerity, you need to make sure that you are well positioned to control the herd, because people are going to be very upset when inflation continues to go up, when the government has no alternative solutions, and when they want to keep pressing for war, which they have to, because the US dollar is intimately linked with the geopolitical advantage that the United States has enjoyed for so long. And people will start to realize that very soon. As US global influence begins to wane, the strength of the dollar will diminish, and they are going to have to deal with a very disgruntled population of people who are starting to lean into all kinds of theories about how the world works. And because of the social media filter bubbles, you know, the radicalization that happens online as a result of the algorithm serving you more of the same, and not serving you things that you disagree with, but serving you things that only confirm your pre-existing opinions, so people never get the alternative viewpoint. In addition to that, now you're actually just going to be forcing people to go over to platforms like Rumble, and you're going to completely divide these two people into these echo chambers, because we're entering the age of true austerity, where controlling the narrative is paramount to everything else at this point in time. So what they're trying to do is systematically murk any dissident voice who is perhaps overzealous in any political direction. When you're like this channel and you try to keep a well-balanced point of view on things and very agnostic in Switzerland on most issues, you're not typically in the crosshairs because, I don't know, I mean, I shouldn't speak too soon on this. You know, they could take us down too, just for simply, you know, questioning things, right? And that could happen. I'm not naive to that happening, but it's very possible. So I think what this is telling me is that the more and more you see this happen, the closer and closer we're getting. Again, I can't say whether or not Russell Brand did what he's accused of or not. Obviously, what had likely happened is that somebody within YouTube or Google made the call that you got to get rid of this guy. Now, was it an intern? Was it somebody lower down the ladder, and this decision is going to be reversed once he appeals it? That's very possible. It's happened before. And I will say that they do seem to provide a path of redemption for people. If you've noticed in recent days, suddenly all of the attacks on Elon Musk have subsided. Perhaps it has something to do with him visiting Benjamin Netanyahu, or perhaps it has something to do with his relinquishing control of Starlink to the US military and basically now providing that capability effectively to the Ukrainian military, which will allow them to increase their capabilities to target places inside of Russia, which is only going to escalate the war further. But suddenly, after relinquishing control of Starlink, people are starting to say, oh, well, Elizabeth Warren actually owes Elon Musk an apology. How quickly the tables have turned, isn't it? So all I'll say is that don't put your eggs in that basket either, because I would say that Elon is starting to come off as quite capricious when it comes to where his loyalty lies, so to speak. And I understand what he's trying to do. Like, I truly think that he wants to create certain things, but he is bound by this bullshit military-industrial complex system that he has to kind of amend all of his entrepreneurial endeavors to. I get that. I get that he needs to, you know, if he wants to build the fast supercar that has instant torque and 1,000 horsepower, you know, you gotta, I mean, the fact that he's doing that in the first place and hasn't been taken out yet, in spite of the fact that he's going up against a multi-trillion-dollar petro industry, is just mind-boggling to me day after day that he's still walking around. Okay, but that you're going after all of these different areas, whether it's Twitter, which is the public square, it's the town square where people share ideas. Okay, you have Starlink, which is the global way to communicate. Now off-grid, which the military is going to be leveraging. You have Tesla, which is out there collecting all kinds of data and being built by us for the military. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go and watch the video I released 2 nights ago about artificial intelligence and how we are the ones that are building it, and it's not the military that is innovating ahead of its time anymore, because we're entering the age of AI where they need us to effectively engineer our own prison by acquiring data that we can feed into these mother brain algorithms, these learning computers that will make sense of all the data and ultimately have some emergent, transcendent form of consciousness that is ultimately wielded over us all, to our own detriment, to oppress us. So, yeah, that's what's going on. World War III is coming, and they're getting rid of all the people who might make a stink about it. That's all it is. Decision to provide Ukraine with ATACMS has not yet been made, says Kirby. You notice how, you remember that old joke about that George Carlin, if you ever watch any George Carlin specials, he made a joke about No Kids Left Behind, And or it used to be, at one time it was giving kids a head start, and then they switched it to no kids left behind, and he's like, somebody's losing fucking ground here, right? Well, the same thing is happening here. They incrementally, right when they introduce something, they're going to bring it out to the public. They're right when they introduce the idea, where when they originally float the idea for public consumption, that, well, we may need to send F-35s at some point, or, you know, or even if they come out and say F-35s are out of the question, you know that they're already preparing to send F-35s. Now, the day that they come out and say nuclear weapons are off the table, we're never going to send nuclear weapons to Ukraine, you know that is the beginning of softening people up to the idea that they're going to give Ukraine nuclear weapons. So how they've played this ATACMS thing is, originally it was out of the question. Remember, Biden said it would lead to World War III. We're talking about World War III, right? And then eventually they said, you know, ATACMS is off the table. And then they said that we will continue to assess and blah, 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 blah. And now they're saying that decision to provide Ukraine with ATACMS has not yet been made. So they're trying to put the feelers out there to see, and they have back channel communication with the Russians, so they know what likely would constitute a imminent escalation to the nuclear level or not. And they're only going to do this stuff if they know, if they can guarantee that it's not going to go there yet. So according to John Kirby, he says that the president has said that he will do it, but he continues to want the interagency bodies, the Department of Defense, the Department of State, the National Security Council, to look at ATACMS. They are not off the table. So effectively saying that, yeah, we're like a month away from the announcement. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said that there are currently no new decisions on the issue to transfer Taurus missiles to Ukraine. So they're starting to soften up in the language. It's no longer, we're not sending ATACMS. It's the decision to provide Ukraine with ATACMS has not been made yet. ATACMS are not going to be, it's not so much that they're game changers, but they're going to prolong the conflict and they're going to escalate the conflict. Because contrary to what you're hearing out of the pro-Russia camp, the Ukrainians continue to lob HIMARS missiles at the Russians, and I do believe they were only given about 42 of those things, and they're still in operation. So clearly the Russians are having a hard time targeting them. Russia is currently in Iran with talks today. So recently they met with North Korea. Now they're meeting with the Iranians. And you got this stuff popping off in Azerbaijan and Armenia that I don't know enough about. But it's all just creating more and more instability. You have the price of oil skyrocketing. Does that have something to do with what's going on with Iran? God only knows. Interestingly, on the topic of controlling the narrative, the New York Times released a piece this morning that said that the analysis of the video weapon fragments collected at the scene of the strike that killed at least 15 civilians in Kostyantynivka, Ukraine, you know, that marketplace in which 15 civilians were taken out. Well, at the time, many of us were saying, you know, this doesn't make any sense. Unless there were some high-ranking NATO officers eating lunch there, this doesn't make any sense. And I myself made the suggestion that this might be some kind of errant S-300 missile, which is an honest mistake when your country is under attack, right? So you would own up to the mistake. But they wait for a month later, and then the information comes out in the New York Times that evidence suggests Ukrainian missile caused market tragedy. So, and it's just another instance of where the narrative is tightly controlled, and by the time this gets out there, you know, the lie is already spread around the world. The damage has already been done. You're never going to be able to undo that first impression. And we're going to just see more and more of this as time goes on. So I would strongly encourage people to go back and watch some of our older videos that deal more with preparedness, how to stockpile food. Food prices are only going to go up. I was talking to one of our main distributors last week, and he told me that they're not making any contracts with many food companies for longer than 3 months. Okay, and that's because price instability, climate issues, war, oil price instability. They don't want to let this stuff go. They don't want to lock themselves into a contract and then the price is just going to skyrocket in 3 months. And that is rare, right? Because in business, typically you want to lock in contracts. You want to guarantee that, you know, you're going to be doing business with a company. Now companies aren't even doing that. They're making no guarantees beyond 3 months. And just remember, China is stocking up. The situation with India and the Sikhs and Canada, I don't know what to make of it. Is this just going to nudge India further in the direction towards BRICS? It may. It may. There are some issues with the Sikh population there wanting to separate, I believe, and there's a very large Sikh population in Canada. In fact, the Indian population is one of the largest in Canada. I think they're almost at around 10% of our population as a whole, particularly in British Columbia. So they have a lot of influence, and so do the Chinese, for that matter. They make a very large portion of the population, particularly in the West. So Canada is somewhat of an outlier in terms of the World War III stuff, because we have so many people from a lot of our belligerent countries, and you know how that's going to play out, whether that will work to our advantage, likely not. And it's certainly not going to help our food crisis issue that we're currently dealing with here, which is only going to get worse. Inflation is only going to continue to rise. They cannot hide it anymore. I mean, they can. And if Joe Biden starts depleting the strategic oil reserve again, that's when things get weird. Okay, that's when we start entering very, very uncertain times, if they start turning on the spigot again. But enjoy this type of content while you have it, because I think that we exited the golden era of YouTube probably 2018-ish. You know, that last podcast with AJ and Joe Rogan, that 4.5 hour long one, that was peak, you know, internet, in terms of your ability to say what you want, how you want to say it. And it's pretty much been steadily going downhill since that time. And it's going to take a long time until something comes along that is able to effectively challenge that. And again, I don't put too much stock into X or Tesla or Twitter being our savior in that respect, judging by Elon's willingness to capitulate so easily, whether it be on the issue of Starlink or Twitter. Okay. So anyways, guys, let me know what you think in the comment section below. More prepping content is coming your way. Stay tuned. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.